Good morning, doctor and everyone. My name is Jessica Morigin and my matrix number is BB231100590. So now I'll be presenting my study that titled Trends in the Gender Pay Gap in Malaysia, an analysis from 2019 to 2023. This presentation explores how wage disparities between men and women in Malaysia have changed over the last 5 years, including during the COVID-19 pandemic. Here is the outline of my presentation, which I will begin with an introduction, followed by the problem statement, research objectives, literature review, methodology, findings, and finally the conclusion. Here is the outline of my presentation, which I will begin with an introduction, followed by the problem statement, research objectives, literature review, methodology, findings, and finally the conclusion. Let's move on to the problem statement. Despite improvement in education and workforce participation, Malaysia still faces persistent wage inequality. Women consistently earn less than men, and raising concerns about fairness, productivity, and effective utilization of talent. Malaysia also experienced significant economic disruption due to the COVID-19 that happened during 2020. While wage and employment fell across the board during that time, and it was unclear whether the gender pay gap narrowed or widened during this time. There is also limited recent evidence on how the pandemic affected the gender pay gap. Most studies use older data or focus on specific sectors, leaving a gap in understanding nationwide trends from 2019 until 2023. Therefore, an updated analysis is essential. Understanding these trends supports better labor market planning, gender-inclusive policies, and sustainable economic development. So, the purpose for this study is to examine the gender pay gap trends from 2019 until 2023 to identify the contributing factors and analyze how economic conditions influence these disparities. So this is the research objective for this study. There are three objectives, which is the first one is to examine the trends in the gender pay gap in Malaysia from 2019 until 2023, and then the second one to identify the key factors contributing to the gender pay gap in Malaysia, and the last one is to analyze the impact of economic conditions, including the COVID-19 pandemic, on the gender pay gap in Malaysia. This is the literature review that shows the gender wage inequality in Malaysia has been documented in many studies. So I have 4 articles that I had reviewed so that I can relate with my study. So the first article is from Ismail in 2017, which examined the existence of glass ceiling and sticky floor effects in the Malaysian labor market, and find that women experience large wage gaps at both lower and upper ends of the wage distribution. This study is important because it shows that gender pay inequality is not uniform across the income levels. In my opinion, this article provides a strong foundation for understanding wage inequality in Malaysia. But however, its limitation is that it relies on data from the earlier period and does not reflect recent economic changes such as COVID-19 pandemic. Therefore, an updated analysis covering 2019 until 2023 is necessary, just like what my study for. So the second article is about the the article is from Ismail in 2013, Ismail, Osman and Malik, which is focused on gender wage discrimination in the ICT sector, and find that employer discrimination plays a significant role in explaining the wage differences. I believe this article is valuable because it demonstrates that gender pay gaps exist even in modern and skill-intensive sectors, and this challenges the assumption that technological advance alone can eliminate the wage inequality. However, the study is sector and specific, and its findings may not fully represent the overall Malaysian labor market. So the third article is from Zainal Abidin, Ismail and Sulaiman in 2016, which analyzes the occupational segregation and its impact on gender wage differences in Malaysia. The authors conclude that women are often concentrated in lower paying occupations, which contribute to persistent income disparities. In my view, this article clearly explains one of the key structural factors behind the gender pay gap. It does not examine how economic shocks or changes in labor market conditions might influence the occupational choice, which is an important aspect for my study in period 2019 until 2023. So the fourth article is from Chong and Narayanan in 2024, which is the study is about income inequality by gender in Malaysia and had found that wage disparity remained despite increased female labor force participation. I agree with the authors that participation alone does not guarantee income equality. This article also particularly relevant to my study because it highlights that progress in employment must be accompanied by wage equality. However, the study does not specifically analyze the short-term economic disruption, such as the pandemic, which could have altered gender income pattern. And the last article is from Karim and Hussain in 2024, which is reviewed that the role of Industry 4.0 in addressing gender pay disparity and argue that digitalization presents both opportunities and challenges for wage equality. In my opinion, based on this article, it offers a useful theoretical perspective but lacks strong empirical evidence specific to Malaysia. As such, while it helps explain potential future trends and it refines the need for data-driven analysis and actual wage trends during the recent year. So overall, the literature review confirmed that presence of gender pay inequality in Malaysia, and most studies focus on early period and specific sectors. But so in my view, there is a clear research gap in analyzing the recent trends and the impact of economic condition between 2019 until 2023. So that's why this study was made. For the methodology, this study used quantitative analysis as the research design to analyze the gender pay gap trends from 2019 until 2023, and it enables the systematic measurement and comparison of wage between men and women, and also focus on patterns and contributing factors and economic influence on wage disparities. So for the data collection, it was from the secondary data, which is the first data that we get is from DOSM, which is Department of Statistics Malaysia, MGGI, Malaysian Gender Gap Index, and government reports and international agency. It also includes the gender disaggregated wage, employment data, sectoral information, and economic indicators. This secondary data also chosen for comprehensive multi-year labor market coverage. So for the sampling, the target population was the employed individuals in Malaysia across all sectors. So the total population sampling in Malaysia was used, including all available data from 2019 until 2023. And this sampling was made because to ensure the findings accurately represent the national labor market trends. So for the data analysis, we're going to use this descriptive statistic analysis to analyze the average wage through median wage, and also the comparative analysis across years, sectors, and occupation, and economic impacts and assessed by comparing the pre, during, and post-pandemic wage pattern. So as a result, is presented using the table, chart, and graph for clarity and interpretation. Okay, now I'll be presenting the findings from this analysis. So in this slide, it shows the graph that is the analysis of gender pay gap in Malaysia from 2019 to 2023, where it shows that men consistently earn more than women in all 5 years. Let's start with in 2019, where men earn 2,477 ringgit Malaysia as their median, while the women earn 2,370 ringgit Malaysia as their median. So it shows that women earn 95.7% of men wage, while in 2020, during the pandemic, both groups saw wage declines, but men wage dropped more sharply and temporarily narrowing the gap. However, from 2021 onwards, men's wage recovered faster, and in 2020-23, the men hold the median as 2,675 ringgit Malaysia, while the women had their median as 2,464 ringgit Malaysia. And from this analysis, it shows that the gap women earn 92.1% of men wage. So thus the pay gap widened the post-pandemic. So next we're going to explain about the factors that contributing to the pay gap based on the analysis just now. So there are 5 factors that make the gap happen, which is the first one is occupational segregation, where women are concentrated in lower paying roles and underrepresented in technical and leadership position, while the second one is the career interruption and motherhood penalty, where women often leave workforce during prime career years for caregiving. This leads to the slower career progression and lower lifetime earning. And during the COVID-19 happened, it also increased the unpaid domestic workload for women. So the third one is the labor force participation and informal work, where the female participation rate remains lower than men's, and women more likely in part-time or informal jobs, which meant they had the slower wage growth. This, because of their family responsibility, remain top reason for non-participation in the labor force market. And the fourth factor is about the limited advancement into leadership, where women less represented in high salary leadership position. And during the post-pandemic, it hiring the trends favor men in senior roles. So the women had the fewer opportunities to influence the workplace decision. That's why women participation in labor force remain low, and also their wage gap also lower because of their position in the organization or in the workforce are lower also. So, and the last factor is about the skills gap in STEM and digital fields, where women less represented in high growth and high income STEM fields, and also had the limits access to wage premium linked to the digital economy scale. Okay, next we're going to explain the impact of economic condition along the period which is from 2019 until 2023, which we focus on 2020, which is happened the pandemic had a strong influence on wage trend during that time, which is the COVID-19 pandemic. And in 2020, wage was showed the decline significantly, and the gap narrowed only because men wage fell faster during that time. However, during 2021 and 2023, male-dominated the sectors such as manufacturing recovered more quickly, and women return to work was slower due to caregiving burdens and limited flexibility, because during that time they also had their responsibility with their family. So this led to the widening gender pay gap. So let's proceed with the summary of the findings, where Malaysia gender pay gap persists and widened after the pandemic, and the temporary narrowing in 2020 was due to the economic contraction and not improvement in equality. So it also because of the structural issues such as occupational segregation, leadership gaps, and caregiving demands continue to hold women back from participate in labor force or in workforce. So for the recommendation, the future research that should be done is to examine the industry specific wage gap and long-term pandemic effects on career progression and the role of flexible work arrangements. So, in conclusion, the gender pay gap in Malaysia is shaped by deep structural factors and economic conditions like the COVID-19 pandemic, and also the pandemic highlighted the existing inequalities rather than solving them. So this addressing the gender pay gap requires strong policies, better support system, inclusive workplace cultures, and greater representation of women in leadership and STEM field. So what I can conclude is the gender pay gap is essential for Malaysia economic resilience and social progress. Okay, that's all for the presentation today. Thank you.